At 3 a.m., my sister sneaked into my room and grabbed my credit card while I was asleep. By sunrise, $16,500 was gone, spent on first-class tickets to Rome and extravagant gifts with our cousin. Please stay with me as I tell you my story, and don't forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. I woke up to check my account and froze. Every charge screamed betrayal. Sloan had been staying with me for weeks, acting helpless, claiming she needed support. I had welcomed her without hesitation, never imagining she could do something like this. Our cousin, Emery, was clearly involved, smiling in photos on social media while flaunting the luxuries bought with my money. It was impossible not to notice the pattern, the careful planning behind every extravagant purchase. I tried talking to Dad, hoping he would understand, but he just waved me off. "Stop worrying, she wouldn't do that," he said, as if my gut instincts were nothing. Sloan carried herself as usual, light and carefree, unaware that I already knew more than she could imagine. Every laugh, every brag, every casual mention of the trip made my resolve stronger. I didn't panic, even though my heart raced. I had seen this side of her before, the entitlement, the thinking she could always get away with whatever she wanted. And so I watched quietly, letting her think she had won, letting Dad's denial shield her from reality. But I wasn't fooled. I had my own understanding of the situation, and it gave me a strange calm. I knew the story wasn't over, not by a long shot. By the time the morning sun filled the room, I smiled. Not because the money didn't matter, but because I could see what they couldn't. I was awake, aware, and ready. The card was gone, the money spent, but the game had only just begun. Sloan thought she had the upper hand, but I already had the advantage, quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment. I had always been the responsible one, juggling long hours at my IT job, managing bills, and making sure everything ran smoothly at home. While I worked late into the nights, Sloan drifted in and out of my life with little care for stability. She rarely held a job for more than a few months, and school never seemed to stick. I didn't complain. I supported her when no one else would, thinking family was supposed to help each other. I never imagined that this pattern of dependence masked something deeper, a sense of entitlement that seemed to grow with every handout. Emery, our cousin, had always been nearby, the perfect partner in Sloan's escapades. Whenever she wanted to indulge, Emery was right there, encouraging her impulsiveness and celebrating her reckless decisions. They seemed inseparable, a duo thriving on luxury and avoidance of responsibility, while the rest of us bore the brunt of consequences. I couldn't deny it any longer. I saw the scheme forming long before the first purchase appeared on my statement. I thought back to countless family gatherings and moments when favoritism was impossible to miss. Sloan would get praised for minor accomplishments, while my contributions were quietly noted or overlooked. Dad's eyes would light up at her smallest victories, while mine seemed expected, taken for granted. Every birthday, every holiday, I watched her be lifted up, and while I tried to feel happiness for her, a quiet frustration had begun to simmer. These flashes of partiality weren't new. They had shaped the environment in which Sloan thrived, making her think the world owed her indulgence without effort. Even as I reflected, I started seeing patterns I had ignored before. Every impulsive decision, every indulgent trip, every casual reliance on my help wasn't random. It was predictable. I didn't feel rage exactly. I felt clarity. Sloan had always acted without thinking, always assuming someone else would catch her mistakes. Emery's constant approval made it worse, reinforcing the idea that consequences existed for everyone else, not them. I found myself planning quietly, letting thoughts take shape without revealing them. Small actions, subtle adjustments, quiet strategies that might have seemed like coincidence to an observer were really the foundation of something bigger. I knew her impulses would guide her, as they always had, and I could prepare to meet them with precision. I didn't need to rush. Her own behavior was reliable enough to set the stage for what was coming. It wasn't about punishment yet, or confrontation. It was about understanding, observing, and waiting for the moment when all the pieces aligned. Every late-night reflection, every careful thought about her habits, her sense of entitlement, and the ways Emery bolstered her actions, made the path forward clearer. This wasn't impulsive revenge. It was strategy built on years of insight into family dynamics, patterns, and predictable indulgence. And with every quiet observation, I felt more certain that Sloan's next mistake would be the one that couldn't be ignored. That night, the house was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. I had no idea Sloan was awake, moving with purpose while I slept peacefully. The next morning, the evidence became undeniable. Reviewing the security footage, I saw her shadow cross the room, hands deliberate and unhesitant, taking what wasn't hers. Every timestamp lined up perfectly, leaving no room for doubt. She had planned it carefully, yet her confidence made it almost casual, like she had done this countless times before. As I began tracing the transactions, a pattern emerged that was both infuriating and fascinating. There were first-class flights booked to destinations I had only dreamed of visiting, boutique purchases with prices that made me gasp, and lavish gifts that seemed utterly unnecessary. Every purchase carried a signature of indulgence, a thrill-seeking streak that was typical of Sloane's impulsive nature. Emery's influence was clear too, often appearing as co-signer or collaborator in these extravagances, making it a team effort designed to flaunt and provoke. I didn't just feel anger at the financial loss. That would have been easy to process if it were simply about money. What burned inside me was the manipulation, the casual way she assumed she could cross boundaries and betray trust without consequence. It wasn't reckless, it was intentional. I kept going over the footage and receipts, noting the audacity in every line item, feeling my frustration mix with a growing clarity. This wasn't an accident. It was a declaration of entitlement, a bold statement that she believed she could act without accountability. As I pieced everything together, I realized how predictable her behavior was. She had followed the patterns I had seen for years, relying on impulsiveness and charm to get what she wanted. That predictability, though, gave me something powerful: foresight. I could anticipate her next moves, understand her timing, and see how she would attempt to slip back into my life as if nothing had happened. The thought of her returning wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. By midday, I felt a strange mixture of resentment and readiness. I wasn't panicked or rushed. I was alert, watching for signs of her next step. Every detail of her night, the way she moved, the choices she made, the accomplices she involved, served as a map for what was coming. Sloane's return would be deliberate, calculated, and designed to seem natural. She would step back into the space she assumed was hers, expecting forgiveness or ignorance, unaware that I had seen everything, remembered everything, and was prepared. The anticipation was tense, almost electric. I could feel it building as the hours passed, knowing that soon she would walk through the door with confidence, thinking the game was hers to control. But I had already adjusted my own strategy, silently positioning myself to respond in ways she couldn't foresee. And in that quiet, simmering awareness, I realized that the moment of reckoning wasn't far off. Her return was coming, and when it did, nothing would be the same. A week passed, each day stretching with a slow, uneasy rhythm as I tried to convince myself the situation might resolve itself, though I knew better. Then she appeared, stepping into my apartment as though she belonged there, her designer luggage rolling behind her with a soft click. She was impeccably dressed, every detail curated to perfection, radiating a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Her smile was casual, her tone light, as if nothing had happened, and she expected the world to simply accommodate her presence without question. It was infuriating, the ease with which she assumed normalcy, acting untouched by the chaos she had caused. Dad arrived shortly after, and almost immediately, he spoke in the same dismissive tone he had always used whenever Sloan was involved. "Stop pretending, she would never touch your money," he said, his voice carrying certainty, almost like a shield against reality. There was no hesitation, no pause for doubt. He truly believed in her innocence, in the story she had spun so convincingly. The conviction in his words was maddening, but I had learned long ago that arguing with him, while he was this certain, was pointless. Instead, I kept my expression neutral, letting the world believe what it wanted while I quietly measured and observed. As they spoke, my thoughts wandered, tracing the countless instances of Sloane's selfishness that I had witnessed over the years. There were times when she had manipulated situations to her benefit, moments when her charm masked recklessness and disregard for others. I remembered her impulsive decisions, her habit of leaning on anyone willing to support her, while giving little in return. The pattern was clear, consistent, and undeniable. She had learned long ago how to navigate through life expecting indulgence, expecting people to look past her errors, and expecting no consequences. Each memory, each flashback, made it impossible to feel any sympathy for her sudden appearance. I kept my reactions measured, masking the knowledge that I had seen through every act, every subtle attempt to cover her tracks. I let her laugh, let her recount trivial stories, nodded politely when Dad chimed in with approval, and allowed the air to remain calm and seemingly ordinary. On the surface, I was the picture of composure, even warmth, but underneath, a quiet tension hummed, controlled yet undeniable. Every detail she revealed, every casual gesture, was another piece of the puzzle I had been assembling, confirming my understanding of her patterns and the predictability of her actions. The tension between what I knew and what they believed filled the room with a delicate, almost electric silence. She had no idea that every step she took, every word she spoke, was being catalogued in my mind, stored and ready for future reckoning. I let the moment stretch, allowing her to believe in her safety, her immunity, while I prepared for the eventual moment of confrontation. And through it all, I smiled. Not the kind of smile that gave away my thoughts, but one that held quiet certainty, a calm acknowledgement of the control I possessed. It wasn't triumph yet, but it was a promise to myself, a signal that when the time came, the reckoning would be precise, calculated, and unavoidable. Sloan might have believed she had returned victorious, but she had walked straight into a plan she didn't even know existed. In that room, surrounded by her casual confidence and Dad's unwavering denial, I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile, knowing that the story was far from over and soon, it would unfold exactly as I had envisioned. I had always been careful with my finances, but Sloan didn't know the full extent of what she had taken. My credit card wasn't just an ordinary account. It was linked to a secure business account for my IT side hustle, a system I had built to separate personal spending from professional funds. Every transaction she made automatically left a digital footprint, each swipe and purchase recorded, geotagged, and backed up in ways that even she couldn't imagine. The level of detail wasn't accidental. It was intentional, a safeguard I had designed to protect myself in situations exactly like this. As I went through the data, the pattern of her spending became vividly clear. Every flight, every boutique purchase, every gift, everything had been logged with precise timing and location. I could see the routes she had taken, the stores she had entered, and the accomplices she had interacted with along the way. It wasn't just money. It was a map of her actions, a record of choices made without any thought of consequences. Each new detail fueled a mix of frustration and clarity, but instead of acting impulsively, I remained focused, letting the information build into a strategy. I started planning carefully, thinking several steps ahead. This wasn't about confronting her in anger or shouting over what had happened. It was about control, preparation, and precision. Every piece of evidence I gathered added to the bigger picture, allowing me to anticipate her reactions, predict her next moves, and craft a response that would be both effective and inescapable. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing that the chaos she had caused could be met with calm, calculated action. Meanwhile, life around me continued as if nothing had changed. Dad remained blissfully unaware, continuing his pattern of favoritism, excusing her behavior, and speaking as if nothing had occurred. To the outside world, Sloan was simply returning to normal life, and Dad's blind trust only reinforced her confidence. I observed quietly, noting every gesture, every smile, every casual interaction, all while keeping the full extent of my knowledge hidden. Their obliviousness was part of the advantage I now held. I realized that reclaiming the money alone would not suffice. This was bigger than $16,500. It was about accountability, about sending a clear message that manipulation and entitlement had limits. My plan wasn't motivated by spite. It was about teaching a lesson in responsibility and awareness, ensuring that the reckoning would be memorable and unavoidable. I allowed myself to imagine the impact, knowing that each carefully placed step would gradually reveal the truth in a way Sloan and even Dad could not ignore. In that quiet, calculated space, I felt a sense of calm control. The situation was no longer about loss. It was about strategy, foresight, and precision. I knew exactly what needed to be done, and I understood the power of patience in shaping the outcome. When the time came, it wouldn't just be about money. It would be about clarity, justice, and a lesson that Sloan would carry with her far longer than she ever imagined. I acted as if nothing mattered, letting Sloan believe she had free rein, while every interaction was carefully observed. I laughed at her jokes, responded casually to her boasts, and maintained a calm tone that masked the storm of awareness beneath. Every word she spoke, every small victory she flaunted, I noted quietly, letting the atmosphere seem normal while tension subtly built. She had no idea I was reading her like an open book, gauging her reactions and predicting her next move. Sloan continued to parade her luxuries around the house, mentioning extravagant stores, high-end brands, and expensive trips. She spoke with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, assuming I had no clue, assuming Dad's favoritism shielded her completely. The glow of her pride filled the room, and I allowed it to shine, pretending indifference while my mind catalogued every detail, every indulgence, every careless remark that could later serve as leverage. Interactions at home became a delicate dance. Dad would subtly side with her, praising her taste or dismissing minor complaints, creating moments that tested my restraint. I observed the dynamics without engaging, letting the conversation flow in ways that highlighted their assumptions. Each smile, each agreement, each nod from Dad was a clue, a reflection of their blind confidence, and I absorbed it all silently. The tension was invisible but thick, a quiet undercurrent that I used to my advantage. I began shaping circumstances with intention. Casual invitations, friendly suggestions, and little gestures of hospitality became tools. Everything appeared spontaneous, ordinary, and benign, but in reality, I was carefully positioning them in a space where their behavior would naturally expose itself. Each move was deliberate, a quiet orchestration designed to reveal excess, entitlement, and carelessness in its purest form. To draw them fully into the plan, I arranged something that seemed like a simple treat, ordering high-end takeout from the kind of restaurants they adored. The choice of dishes, the timing of delivery, the presentation, every element was calculated. This wasn't just about food. It was about creating a controlled environment where they would let their guard down completely, showing the arrogance and indulgence that had defined Sloan's actions. I ensured the setting would be comfortable for them, giving them the sense of control, while in truth, the situation was entirely under my direction. As I finalized the arrangements, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The atmosphere was set, the players positioned perfectly, and every subtle cue had been accounted for. The trap wasn't forceful. It was natural, crafted through patience and observation. When the moment came, the contrast between my calm and their overconfidence would be undeniable. Every small choice, every carefully staged interaction, had prepared them for a reveal they could not anticipate. I smiled softly, knowing the evening would unfold exactly as I had designed, with consequences they had no way of foreseeing. The evening arrived exactly as I had planned, the apartment filled with subtle hints of careful preparation. The aroma of gourmet takeout mingled with faint notes of music I knew they loved, creating a setting that felt warm and ordinary, yet carried an unspoken tension. Everything was in its place, each small detail chosen to draw attention, to make Sloan and Dad notice without realizing why. I moved through the space with calm precision, letting the atmosphere speak quietly, setting the stage without a single word. Sloan appeared first, striding in with the confidence of someone who believed she owned the room. Her designer outfit gleamed under the soft lighting, every accessory perfectly matched, every movement deliberate. She rolled her luggage behind her, a silent display of her latest indulgence, the luxury she had gained at my expense. She smiled easily, unaware of the quiet observation she had walked into, her sense of entitlement filling the space like a tangible presence. Dad followed, the weight of his certainty accompanying him as he scanned the apartment. He was ready, as usual, to dismiss any concern I might express, to lecture me about imagined paranoia. His eyes flicked to the subtle touches I had arranged, but he said nothing, assuming I had gone overboard in trying to impress or entertain. Instead, he focused on Sloan, praising her appearance, her choices, and her charm, unknowingly reinforcing the behavior that would make the evening's purpose so clear. I maintained my calm, measured movements, responding with light conversation and quiet attentiveness. I allowed them to fill the room with their overconfidence, each boast and careless remark recorded in my mind, catalogued carefully. I didn't need to challenge them or argue. The space itself was a mirror, reflecting their arrogance and entitlement, making them vulnerable without realizing it. The more they assumed control, the more power I quietly held. Subtle cues hinted at my awareness. A tablet rested casually on the counter, notifications blinking faintly in the background, suggesting organization and observation. Every small arrangement, every deliberate placement of items, served as an invisible signal. I had noticed, I had recorded, and I was prepared. They were walking into an environment where every movement, every word, every gesture would feed into the reckoning I had designed. By the time Sloan and Dad settled, the stage was complete. The dinner, the ambience, the careful orchestration of space and detail. It all created a controlled arena for what was coming. They believed they were in familiar territory, confident and untouchable. But they had no idea that every aspect of the evening was part of a quiet trap. And as I moved between them with a calm smile, I felt the subtle thrill of anticipation. The moment I had envisioned was drawing near, and nothing about the night would unfold as they expected. She tried to recover, brushing off my comments with jokes and light deflections, insisting she couldn't possibly have spent so much or traveled so recklessly. But the calmness in my voice, the exactness of what I had observed, made it impossible for her to maintain the facade. Each attempt to lie only revealed gaps in her story, subtle contradictions that even she couldn't fully cover. I watched as her casual tone wavered, her carefully rehearsed defenses cracking under quiet pressure. Dad's expression shifted as well. At first, he had been confident, assuming my concerns were exaggerated. Now, the precision in my words, the ease with which I spoke about details only I could have known, made him pause. His eyebrows lifted, a flicker of doubt appearing where certainty had once been. For the first time, I saw him hesitate, sensing that I wasn't merely imagining situations or overreacting. The dynamic in the room was changing, almost imperceptibly, yet undeniably, and I maintained my calm, letting the tension grow naturally. I continued, pointing out inconsistencies in Sloan's explanations without raising my voice or showing anger. I mentioned the sequence of flights, the boutique purchases, and the timing of gifts, all phrased as simple observations. There was no accusation in my tone, only clarity and methodical detail. Each point highlighted gaps in her story, demonstrating that I had been attentive, organized, and prepared. Slowly, the room's energy shifted from casual conversation to careful calculation. Sloane's confidence faded as she realized the extent of my awareness. By the time I finished, the shift was complete. Sloane's usual ease and arrogance had vanished, replaced with a subtle panic she could not hide. She looked at me differently now, eyes darting, posture tense, aware that her control had slipped. The sense of untouchable authority she had carried for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet recognition that the rules had changed. She had underestimated me, and the balance of power in the room had tipped. I let the silence settle, giving her a moment to absorb it, allowing the weight of the situation to sink in fully. Dad remained quiet as well, finally processing the evidence of my calm command. And as Sloane's gaze lingered on me, tense and uncertain, it became clear. She was no longer untouchable. The shift had occurred, and nothing about the room, or the evening, would ever be the same again. I moved quickly, methodically, taking steps that ensured Sloan and Emery could no longer act without consequence. Every account they had relied on was immediately restricted, passwords changed, and cards deactivated. The measures were discreet but absolute. There was no way for them to bypass the barriers I had put in place. I wasn't acting out of anger. It was about control, structure, and making clear that reckless behavior carried real-world consequences. Every restriction I implemented sent a quiet but unmistakable message. Indulgence without accountability would no longer be tolerated. Next, I turned to subtle but effective communication. I shared carefully selected evidence digitally with family members, presenting facts in a composed and factual manner. Nothing was exaggerated or dramatic, but the clarity of the documentation spoke volumes. It wasn't public shaming, but it was public enough that those who mattered could see the truth. Every screenshot, timestamp, and detail was visible to those who had once blindly trusted Sloan, forcing them to confront the reality they had ignored. The approach was precise, strategic, and intentional, every element designed to highlight responsibility rather than punish recklessly. The results were immediate. Sloane's social standing, previously buoyed by charm and entitlement, began to falter. Friends and relatives who had once overlooked her behavior now questioned it openly, noticing the discrepancies in her stories and purchases. Emery, too, faced limitations and scrutiny as their shared actions came to light. Even Dad could no longer maintain the same casual denial. He was forced to acknowledge the favoritism that had allowed her to act without restraint, and he began to wrestle quietly with the consequences of turning a blind eye for so long. The atmosphere of unearned privilege that had existed for years started to crumble under the weight of facts and accountability. Through it all, I kept my composure. There was no gloating, no harsh words, no acts of cruelty. My actions were deliberate, measured, and carefully controlled. The goal was never humiliation for its own sake, but clarity and balance, a restoration of order that reinforced fairness and responsibility. Every choice I made emphasized moral authority rather than vengeance. I remained steady, letting the situation unfold naturally while I stayed firmly in command. Finally, I reclaimed not just the $16,500 that had been taken, but also a sense of dignity that had been undermined. The money's return was symbolic, but the real victory lay in the lesson it represented. Carelessness and entitlement have limits, and accountability is inescapable. Sloan and Emery had learned consequences firsthand, and even Dad began to adjust his perceptions of trust and responsibility. I felt the weight lift, a quiet satisfaction settling in, knowing the measures were precise, fair, and unforgettable. The evening ended with a sense of restored balance, a reaffirmation of boundaries, and a clear demonstration that patience, strategy, and calm authority could turn betrayal into a lesson no one involved would ever forget. The house felt different after everything had settled. Quiet, but not uncomfortable, more like a space cleared of assumptions and unspoken tensions. I spent time reflecting on the family dynamics that had allowed Sloane's behavior to go unchecked for so long. I thought about the patterns, the excuses, the subtle ways favoritism had shaped interactions, and I realized how important it was to draw firm lines. I set boundaries carefully, not as punishment, but as protection. Clear limits on access, expectations, and responsibilities that ensured respect and accountability would no longer be optional. Sloan, for the first time in years, was forced to navigate life without the safety net she had relied on. The luxuries she had taken for granted suddenly required effort and responsibility. Watching her confront the reality of managing on her own, I could see the cracks in her entitlement begin to show. Small frustrations, missed opportunities, and the sudden realization that charm alone couldn't sustain her lifestyle created a subtle but undeniable shift. It wasn't satisfying in a vindictive way. It was a natural consequence of actions previously unchecked, and it underscored the importance of accountability. Meanwhile, I channeled the lessons I had learned into my IT business. Each detail I had meticulously tracked, every strategy one had implemented against Sloane's manipulation, became a tool for growth. I refined processes, strengthened security measures, and expanded my services with confidence I hadn't fully realized I possessed. The ordeal, as difficult as it had been, left me more resourceful, disciplined, and strategic, qualities that propelled my work forward and solidified my independence. Even Dad, slowly and quietly, began to recognize the impact of past favoritism. His reassessments were subtle: a more attentive ear, fewer assumptions about Sloane's innocence, and an openness to seeing things as they truly were. He hadn't changed overnight, but cracks appeared in his old patterns, suggesting that awareness and reflection were possible when confronted with undeniable consequences. In the end, I stood in control of my life in ways I hadn't before. The money, the respect, and the lessons learned had restored balance, but more importantly, I had cultivated confidence in my ability to face future challenges. Life would bring obstacles, surprises, and difficult choices, but I was no longer at the mercy of others' entitlement or carelessness. The experience had transformed my perspective. I had gained clarity, resilience, and a sense of agency that extended far beyond any single conflict. I felt ready to move forward, prepared for whatever came next, and certain that my boundaries, insight, and calm authority would guide me through whatever trials awaited. Do you think I handled Sloan and Dad the right way, or should I have confronted them differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know what you think. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of the latest drama and twists.